Welcome, everyone. Today we're looking into the life of one of history's truly extraordinary figures, Joan of Arc. Our aim here is to really understand her story, her life, her massive impact, and maybe why she still fascinates us so much centuries later. We'll try to untangle the military side, the politics, which were incredibly messy, and her own personal convictions.
It really is an amazing story. And what helps us is the sheer amount of documentation, especially from her trials. We have records from the trial that condemned her and the later one that cleared her name. It gives us this unusually clear window into her world, the controversies, everything. It lets us really examine it all quite closely.
Okay, so to get Joan's story, you really have to picture France back in the 15th century. It was chaotic. Let's set that scene first.
Absolutely essential. I mean, France was being torn apart by the Hundred Years' War. It started way back in 1337, and by Joan's time, it had just wrecked the economy, devastated the land. But it wasn't just the English. France was deeply divided internally. You had King Charles VI, who suffered from these awful bouts of mental illness, creating a power vacuum. And this led to intense rivalries, assassinations even, like Louis, Duke of Orleans, murdered by John the Fearless, the Duke of Burgundy. That kicked off a full-blown civil war between the Armagnacs, loyal to the French crown, and the Burgundians, who, crucially, allied themselves with England.
So France is basically at war with itself and England. England must have loved that. How did they take advantage?
Oh, completely. Henry V saw his chance. He invaded in 1415, won a major victory at Agincourt, and because France was so divided, the English could seize huge chunks of territory, including Paris itself. The worst part was the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. King Charles VI, in one of his unstable periods, was basically forced to sign it. It disinherited his own son, the Dauphin Charles, later Charles VII, calling him illegitimate. And it named the infant King Henry VI of England as the heir to the French throne. It was a disaster for the French cause.
Wow, so Charles VII, the Dauphin, is in a terrible spot. Doubts about his legitimacy, his capital's gone, enemies everywhere. You can see why they might have needed a miracle, or at least someone very unexpected. And that person turns out to be Joan, born around, what, 1412, in a little village, Domremy. Her family were peasants, but relatively well-off peasants, right?
That's right, propertied peasants. Her early life seems pretty typical for the time chores, farm work. Her mother gave her religious instruction. She apparently couldn't read or write herself initially.
But then things changed dramatically, around age 13.
Yes, around 1425. It seems to have started after a raid on Domremy. She described seeing a bright light and hearing a voice, which she later identified as St. Michael, the archangel, sometimes with other angels. She said she wept when they left, wishing they'd taken her with them. Later, she identified other voices as St. Margaret and St. Catherine. These were powerful virgin saints known for resisting authority. And in response to these visions, Joan took a vow of virginity.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, how this links up with local prophecies. There were these old stories floating around about an armed maiden who would save France.
Exactly. Prophecies about a woman destroying France, perhaps referring to Queen Isabeau signing the Treaty of Troyes, but a virgin from the borders of Lorraine restoring it. Joan seemed to fit the bill, and she leaned into it. She hinted she was this promised maiden.
So she has these visions, believes she's the prophesied one. What does she do? She can't just march off, can she?
No, she first tried in 1428. She went to nearby Vaucouleurs to ask the local commander, Robert de Baudricourt, for an escort to see the Dauphin. He basically laughed her off, told her cousin to take her home and give her a whipping. Things got worse personally, too. A Burgundian raid forced her family to flee Domremy for a time. This direct experience of war probably just strengthened her resolve.
She didn't give up, though.
Not at all. She went back to Vaucouleurs in January 1429. This time, her persistence, maybe her sheer conviction, started to win people over. Two of Baudricourt's soldiers became her firm supporters. She even got an audience with Charles II, the Duke of Lorraine. He was ill and maybe hoped she had healing powers. She apparently told him she didn't, but did tell him to ditch his mistress.
And all this is happening just as the military situation is getting critical, right?
Precisely. Orleans was under siege by the English. It was the key city holding the Loire River line. If Orleans fell, the English could pour south into the heart of Charles' remaining territory. It was the linchpin. And Joan's voices were telling her specifically now, go list the siege, go help the Dauphin. Then came news of a French defeat, the Battle of the Herrings, trying to intercept an English supply convoy for the siege. That might have been the tipping point for Baudricourt.
So he finally says yes.
He does. He gave her an escort, and this is when she cuts her hair and puts on men's clothes. She kept wearing them for the rest of her life, saying it was more practical for travel and later for safety among soldiers.
So picture this. Early 1429, Chinon. Charles VII, he's about 26, probably desperate, skeptical, and in walks Joan, this 17-year-old peasant girl in men's clothes.
Must have been quite a moment. Accounts say she picked him out even though he was trying to disguise himself among his courtiers. She went straight to him, told him she was sent by God. She assured him he was the true heir, despite the Treaty of Troy, and made two promises. She'd lift the siege of Orleans, and she'd lead him to Rheims for his coronation. Rheims was the traditional site, deep in enemy territory.
Charles must have been, well, stunned, but also cautious, right? He couldn't just trust her immediately.
Exactly. He had her examined. First, by theologians in Poitiers. They questioned her for weeks. Their conclusion was careful. They didn't say her visions were definitely divine, but they found nothing heretical about her. She was a good Catholic. They basically said, given the dire situation, letting her go to Orleans would be the test. If she succeeded, it was from God. If not, well. She also had to undergo a physical examination by noblewomen, including Charles's own mother-in-law, Yolande of Aragon,
Why was that necessary?
to verify her virginity. It was crucial for her claim to be the prophesied maiden savior. If she wasn't a virgin, the English narrative that she was consorting with the devil would gain traction. She passed.
Okay, so Charles is reassured. He commissions armor for her actual plate armor. She designs her own banner, white with religious imagery, and there's that story about the sword.
Yes. She said her voices told her a sword was buried behind the altar at the church of Sainte Catherine de Fierbois. They dug, and supposedly there it was. Rusty, but cleaned up easily. Another sign, adding to her mystique.
Imagine the impact on the French troops at Orleans. They've been besieged for months. Morale is rock bottom. Then this young woman arrives, armored, with her banner, claiming divine backing.
It was electrifying, a total game changer for morale. She wasn't officially in command, the nobles still led, but her presence transformed the mood. She turned this long, grinding political war into something holy. A crusade. She'd ride out, banner in hand, urging the troops on, often right in the thick of the fighting. She apparently had this incredible charisma, this conviction that rubbed off. The commander started listening to her tactical suggestions. And she even sent that defiant letter to the English commander, the Duke of Bedford, telling him God wanted him out of France.
And then Orleans itself. She gets there April 29th, 1429. What happens?
She immediately boosts spirits, helps get supplies in. She wasn't reckless, but she pushed for aggressive action against the English forts surrounding the city. The established commanders were more cautious. She was incredibly brave. During the assault on a key English fortification, Les Tourelles, she was wounded in the shoulder by an arrow. They carried her off, but she insisted on returning later that day to rally the troops for one last push.
And it worked.
It did. The French took Les Tourelles. Seeing that, the English position became untenable. On May 8th, they just packed up and left. The siege was broken, a massive, massive victory.
That must have seemed like absolute proof to the French, the sign she promised.
Absolutely. For the French, it was divine intervention. For the English, though, it just confirmed their view that she was evil, a witch using demonic powers. Now, we go to Rheims for the coronation.
But Rheims was deep in English and Burgundian territory. They had to clear the way first, right? The Loire campaign?
Correct. They needed to secure the Loire river crossings, so they went after the towns the English still held. First Jargeau, June 11th, Joan pushed for a direct assault. During the attack, she was climbing a ladder against the wall when a stone cannonball hit her helmet, splitting it and knocked her down. She got right back up, shouting encouragement, and the town fell soon after. Incredible resilience. And this led to the Battle of Patay on June 18th.
Patay? That was significant, wasn't it?
Hugely significant. The French vanguard caught the English army, mostly longbowmen, completely by surprise as they were retreating. Joan wasn't in the vanguard, but she strongly urged the commanders to pursue the English relentlessly. The result was a rout. The English longbowmen, so feared, were decimated. It was a catastrophic defeat for England, comparable to their victory at Agincourt, but in reverse. It shattered the aura of English invincibility.
So after Patay, the road to Rheims is basically open.
Absolutely much. The march to Rheims became almost a triumphal procession. Town after town, Auxerre, Troyes, Chalon opened their gates or switched allegiance back to Charles. Troyes held out for a few days, but Joan directed preparations for an assault, filling the moat, bringing up artillery, and the city surrendered without a fight.
And finally, Rheims. July 17th, 1429, Charles VII is crowned King of France in Rheims Cathedral.
Just as Joan had promised. She was there, standing near him with her banner, a place of honor. She declared that God's will had been done. It was the absolute peak of her career, the fulfillment of her mission's core objective.
An incredible sequence of events. Lifting the siege, clearing the Loire. winning Patay, crowning the king, all in a few short months. But things didn't stay that way, did they?
No, unfortunately. After the coronation, the political winds began to shift. Joan's influence at court started to wane.
Why was that? She'd just delivered this massive victory.
Well, politics are complicated. Charles and his advisors, especially figures like Georges de la Tremoille, started leaning towards negotiation, trying to make peace, or at least a truce, with the Duke of Burgundy. Remember, Burgundy was still allied with England. Joan, however, wanted to push on militarily. She wanted to take Paris. Her aggressive stance clashed with the court's desire for diplomacy. This tension really came to a head during the attack on Paris in September 1429.
That didn't go well, did it?
No, it was a failure. The assault was poorly planned or supported, maybe deliberately so, by those who didn't want it to succeed. Joan was wounded again, this time by a crossbow bolt in the thigh. Charles ordered a retreat, much to Joan's frustration. The Armagnacs took heavy losses.
And that defeat must have damaged her standing.
It did. Theologians at the University of Paris, which is pro-English, started arguing more forcefully that her inspiration couldn't be divine if she failed. It gave her opponents ammunition.
What did she do after the Paris setback?
She participated in some smaller campaigns. She helped capture the town of Saint-Pierre-le-Moutier in November. But then, a subsequent siege at La Charité-sur-Loire failed due to lack of supplies and support. Another blow to her reputation.
Did Charles completely abandon her?
Not entirely. Not yet. She returned to court, and it was around this time, late 1429, that Charles formally ennobled Joan and her family as a reward for her services. They were given the surname Dulies. But with a truce agreed with Burgundy, there wasn't much immediate military work for her within the royal army structure. Joan grew restless.
So she takes matters into her own hands.
Pretty much. In March 1430, she heard Compiègne, a town loyal to Charles, was being threatened by Burgundian forces. Without clear royal orders, she gathered a small band of volunteers and mercenaries and rode off to help defend the town. She had some initial success, even defeating a mercenary captain. But her independent action put her in a precarious position.
And this leads to her capture.
Yes, on May 23, 1430, during a skirmish outside Compiègne, she led a sortie against the Burgundian camp. They were forced to retreat back towards the town gates. Joan directed the rear guard, ensuring others got back safely. But then, the town gates were shut maybe too early out of panic, maybe deliberately. She was trapped outside with a few soldiers and was pulled from her horse by a Burgundian archer. She was captured by troops loyal to John II of Luxembourg, a vassal of the Duke of Burgundy.
She tried to escape, didn't she?
Twice. The second time was quite dramatic. She was held in a high tower at Beaurevoir Castle. She jumped from the window, probably about 60 feet. Miraculously, she wasn't killed, just stunned and bruised. But she was recaptured. Her determination was incredible, even in captivity.
What happened then? The Burgundians had her, but the English wanted her badly.
Oh, the English wanted her desperately. Bishop Pierre Cauchon of Beauvais, a powerful churchman fiercely loyal to the English cause whose diocese included Compiègne, immediately started pushing for her to be handed over. He argued she should be tried for heresy. Negotiations dragged on for months. Eventually, the Duke of Burgundy agreed to sell her to the English. The price was 10,000 livres tournois, a king's ransom, literally. In late 1430, she was transferred to English custody and taken to Rouen, their main base in France.
Which brings us to that troubling question. Charles VII, he owed her his crown, arguably. Did he do anything to try and rescue her or ransom her back?
There's no evidence of any serious attempt. It's a debated point. Maybe he couldn't afford the ransom. Maybe his advisors counseled against it. Maybe politically it was just too difficult or risky. But on the surface, it looks like he abandoned the woman who had saved his kingdom. It's a stark reminder of the often brutal realities of medieval politics.
So, January 1431, the trial begins. And this wasn't a fair trial by any stretch of the imagination.
Not even close. It was a politically orchestrated show trial from the start. The English needed to discredit her, and by extension, discredit Charles VII's coronation.
What were their specific aims? How did they hope to achieve that through a heresy trial?
Well, if they could prove Joan was a heretic, a witch, someone inspired by the devil, then Charles VII's coronation at Reims, where she stood beside him, would be tainted. It would invalidate his claim to the throne in the eyes of God and the world, strengthening the English claim through the Treaty of Troyes. It was also about church politics. Bishop Cauchon and the pro-English theologians from the University of Paris wanted to assert their authority and condemn someone who claimed direct divine inspiration, bypassing the church hierarchy. The whole thing was rigged.
How so? What were the irregularities?
Numerous. As someone accused of heresy, she should have been held in a church prison with female guards. Instead, the English kept her in a secular military prison, guarded by rough male soldiers. This put her under constant threat. The charges weren't formally read to her until weeks into the process. She was denied legal counsel, despite asking for it. The judges, led by Cauchon, were almost all French clergy who sided with the English or Burgundians. And crucially, evidence later emerged during her rehabilitation trial that the official court records were deliberately altered, questions changed, answers twisted to make her seem guilty.
Yet, despite all that pressure, the isolation, the hostile court, she held her own remarkably well during the questioning, didn't she?
Astonishingly well. The transcripts, even the likely biased ones, show her intelligence, her steadfastness, and sometimes her sharp wit. She often evaded theological traps laid by educated clergymen.
That famous answer about being in God's grace comes to mind. Can you remind us of that? It really floored them.
It did. They asked her if she knew she was in God's grace. It was a classic catch-22. If she said yes, she'd be claiming divine knowledge, which was heresy. If she said no, she'd be admitting guilt or separation from God. Her answer was brilliant. If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me. It was pious, humble, and completely sidestepped the trap. It apparently stunned the court into silence for a moment. It showed she wasn't just some naive peasant.
Did they torture her?
They showed her the instruments of torture, threatened her with it. There was apparently a debate among the judges, but the majority voted against actually applying it, perhaps fearing it would make her claims seem more sympathetic or invalidate the trial. But the psychological pressure was immense.
Eventually, though, she did sign something, an abjuration.
Yes. On May 24th, after months of interrogation and pressure, in the cemetery of Saint-Ouen, facing the stake, she signed an abjuration document. The exact contents are disputed. She was illiterate and may not have understood what she signed, but she essentially agreed to renounce her visions, submit to the church, and stop wearing men's clothes. Her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, and she put on a woman's dress.
But that wasn't the end. She relapsed, as they called it. What happened?
This is incredibly tragic and controversial. Just a few days later, she was found back in men's clothes in her cell. Why? The later rehabilitation trial heard testimony suggesting she was forced, that guards took away her dress, left only the male clothes, possibly to trap her. There were also reports she'd been mistreated, possibly even assaulted or threatened with rape by the guards, making her feel unsafe in women's clothes. When questioned, she also said her voices St. Catherine and St. Margaret had returned and berated her for abjuring out of fear, telling her she had damned herself to save her life.
And that was enough for them.
That was all Cauchon needed. Wearing men's clothes again, combined with reaffirming her visions, meant she could be declared a relapsed heretic. For that, the penalty was death. There was no appeal.
So the execution, May 30th, 1431.
Yes, in the old marketplace of Rouen. She was only 19 years old. She famously asked for a cross to be held before her as she died. An English soldier apparently fashioned a small one out of wood for her. A Dominican friar also held a processional crucifix high so she could see it above the flames. Eyewitnesses said she repeatedly called on the name of Jesus. After she died, the English raked back the coals to show she was dead and hadn't somehow escaped, then burned the body twice more to reduce it to ashes, which were then gathered and thrown into the Seine River to prevent any relics being collected. A brutal end.
A truly brutal end, but her death didn't actually reverse the course of the war, did it?
No, not at all. The English victory was short-lived. They couldn't regain the momentum they'd lost after Orléans and Patay. The French continued to push back. Burgundy eventually switched sides back to France, and the 100 Years' War finally ended in 1453 with a French victory. Joan's execution changed nothing militarily in the long run.
But her condemnation remained a problem for Charles V, right? The king crowned by a condemned heretic.
Exactly. It was a stain on his legitimacy, a political liability. Once the war was effectively won and Rouen was back in French hands, Charles took steps to clear her name. He ordered investigations starting around 1450. This led to a formal appellate trial, often called the rehabilitation or nullification trial, authorized by the Pope, which ran from 1455 to 1456.
Well, and what did that trial find?
It was thorough. They interviewed 115 witnesses who had known Joan, people from Domremy, soldiers, clergy, even some who participated in the original trial. The conclusion was unanimous. The original trial was corrupt, biased, full of procedural errors, and legally null and void. The verdict declared the original condemnation unjust and deceitful, nullified her abjuration and execution sentence, and basically rehabilitated her reputation completely. They ordered a cross to be erected on the site of her execution.
What about her visions? Did the rehabilitation trial say they were definitely divine?
Not explicitly. The focus was on clearing her of heresy, proving the first trial was unjust. But the Church's view did evolve over centuries. Pope Leo XIII, much later in 1894, stated her mission was divinely inspired. Of course, modern scholars sometimes look for other explanations. Medical conditions like epilepsy or schizophrenia have been suggested. But diagnosing historical figures is tricky, especially using records from a biased trial. What's undeniable is her absolute belief in her voices gave her extraordinary confidence and resilience.
Let's touch on the cross-dressing again. It was such a key charge against her. Why did she insist on it, even when it was so dangerous?
She gave several reasons. Primarily, she said it was God's command, or the command of her saints, and therefore she obeyed God rather than the Church on this point. She also consistently argued it was more appropriate and safer while imprisoned with male guards. And pragmatically, it made sense for traveling through enemy territory and certainly for fighting in battles. It offered protection and practicality. Some scholars point out that even church doctrine at the time, like writings by Thomas Aquinas, allowed for cross-dressing in specific necessary circumstances, like escaping enemies, which arguably applied to her. For Joan, it seems to have been tied up with her identity as the maiden, her mission, and perhaps maintaining her vow of virginity.
So when you pull it all together, the battles, the trial, the rehabilitation, what is her lasting impact, how is she remembered?
Her legacy is just immense and complex. She's been interpreted in so many ways, obviously as a pivotal military leader who helped turn the tide of the Hundred Years' War, then as a powerful symbol of French nationalism used by everyone, from the monarchy to the revolution, and controversially, even by the far-right Vichy regime and the French resistance during World War II. Both sides claimed her. And then, of course, as a saint. The Catholic Church beatified her in 1909 and canonized her in 1920. Pope Benedict XV made that happen, and in 1922, she was declared one of the patron saints of France. She's revered as a martyr, really, even though technically canonized as a virgin, because she died for her beliefs, her faith, and her country. And beyond France, she's seen as this incredible example of female empowerment, someone who broke all the rules and defied expectations for women in her time. She's probably one of the most written about people from the entire Middle Ages. Countless books, plays, films. Her story just continues to resonate.
It really does. From a village girl hearing voices to commanding armies, crowning a king, facing down her accusers, becoming a saint, a national icon. It's an unbelievable trajectory. Joan of Arc's life really underscores the sheer power of belief and conviction.
Absolutely. Her story forces you to think about how faith, politics, war, and personal courage all collide. That ability she had to inspire people, to make them believe even when everything seemed lost, and to face injustice with such strength, it's still incredibly powerful today.
And maybe it leaves us with something to think about. How much can deeply held belief, whether you see it as divine or just intensely personal, actually shape history? And when faced with overwhelming power structures, what gives someone true authority?